The vibration hits your feet before anything else. A low, constant trembling rising through iron floors, through thin mattress ticking, through bone. 6 decks below the boat deck of the Titanic, the Atlantic is not romantic. It is a black wall of noise pressing against a steel hull 3/4 of an inch thick. This is April 1912. The largest moving object ever built carries 2,200 people toward New York. But the ship most of them experience has nothing to do with the grand staircase. Down here, below the waterline, there are no windows. There is no horizon. There is only the shudder of 29 boilers burning 600 tons of coal a day, and the knowledge that the ocean is on the other side of the wall beside your bed. A woman sits on a lower bunk in cabin G63, folding her daughter's coat. The room is 10 feet by 7. 4 berths are bolted to the walls, stacked too high. A porcelain basin hangs in the corner with a single cold water tap. Her trunk is wedged beneath the lower bunk because there is nowhere else to put it. Everything she owns is in that trunk. She left County Cork 9 days ago and has not seen the sun in 3. Third-class passengers had access to a small open deck area at the stern. The promenades, the boat deck, the lounge decks above. Those were separated by gates and barriers that the White Star Line called divisions. The British Board of Trade required physical separation of steerage from cabin-class passengers. The locks on those gates were not metaphorical, they were iron. The sound world below E-deck was its own country. Engines produced a drone that never stopped, day or night. Ventilation shafts carried a metallic hum that sat just beneath every conversation. And 3 times a day, the meal bugle cut through it all. A bright, sharp blast echoing down corridors painted white, but already greying from coal dust. That bugle was the only clock most third-class passengers had. The dining saloon for steerage sat on F-deck. Long, wooden benches, no tablecloths, enamel plates. Meals were served in 2 sittings because the room could not hold all 710 third-class passengers at once. But here is the detail that reframes everything. The food was good. Porridge, fresh bread, gruel, beef, potatoes, rice soup, biscuits, cheese, pickles, fresh fruit. Many of these passengers came from villages in Ireland, Sweden, Lebanon, and Croatia, where meat appeared on the table once a week, if at all. The Titanic's steerage menu was better than their daily lives at home. That tells you less about the ship than about what they were leaving behind. Most were immigrants. They carried paper tags wired to their coat buttons, showing their name, port of departure, and destination. Families traveled with children under 10 who would have no memory of the country of their birth. Single men were berthed in the bow, single women in the stern, married couples and families amidships. The separation was enforced. A young man could not visit his sister in the women's section without a steward's permission. A teenage girl sits on a bench in the women's section on the stern well deck, writing a letter she will try to mail from New York. She is 16, traveling alone, listed on the manifest as a domestic servant, bound for a placement arranged by a cousin she has never met. The address in her hand was copied 3 times before she left home, in case she lost it. She holds the paper flat against her knee because there is no table and the wind off the stern keeps folding it shut. 2 bathtubs serve the entire third-class population. 2. One for men, one for women, each at the far end of a long corridor on F-deck. 710 people shared those tubs. There was no shower. There was no hot water in the cabins. If you wanted to bathe, you waited. The line stretched along the corridor at 6 in the morning and often remained there until the bugle sounded for breakfast. The toilets were communal, open-doored, and offered no privacy. Men's lavatories near the bow had a trench-style arrangement, a long trough with a continuous water flow. Women's facilities were marginally more enclosed. Neither was cleaned more than once a day. The smell in those corridors settled into clothing and stayed there. Now go deeper. Below steerage, below the passenger decks entirely, the Titanic had another population that never appeared in any brochure. The firemen and coal trimmers worked in the 6 boiler rooms spread across the bottom of the ship. 176 men kept the furnaces alive. Their shifts were 4 hours on, 8 hours off. A stoker's job was to shovel coal from the bunkers into the furnace grates, a repetitive, violent physical action performed in heat that exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The boiler rooms had no ventilation beyond what the natural convection of the funnels provided. The air tasted of sulfur and iron. When a stoker collapsed from heat, and they did collapse, the shift did not pause. Another man stepped to the furnace door and picked up the shovel. The Titanic's contracted speed required a specific boiler pressure, and boiler pressure required a specific rate of coal feed. If the rate dropped, the pressure dropped. If the pressure dropped, the speed dropped. The entire schedule of the crossing, arrival time, harbor booking, passenger connections, mail delivery, depended on human arms maintaining a rhythm that the body was not designed to sustain for 4 consecutive hours. The engineering was precise. It was the men inside it who were treated as replaceable. A fireman grips his shovel at the start of a shift in Boiler Room 5. His forearms are black to the elbow. The glow from the open furnace doors lights his face orange, and the roar from inside those fireboxes drowns out the voice of the man standing 4 feet away. He will shovel roughly 5 tons of coal before his shift ends. He is paid £5, 15 shillings a month. The trimmers had it worse in some ways. Their job was to wheelbarrow coal from the bunkers to the stokers, maintaining an even supply. Coal bunkers were narrow, hot, and structurally unstable. Shifting coal could collapse and bury a man before anyone noticed. Trimmers crawled into spaces 4 feet high to drag the fuel forward. Dust filled their lungs so densely that many coughed black for hours after a shift. These men slept in quarters on E-deck, forward. The bunks were metal-framed, stacked 3 high. The mattresses were straw-filled. The rooms smelled of sweat, coal, and damp wool that never fully dried. They were not permitted in passenger areas under any circumstances. Most first-class passengers had no idea these men existed. There is a system aboard the Titanic that almost no one discusses. The ship carried a ventilation network designed to move air through the lower decks. A series of ducts and electric fans that theoretically brought fresh air below the waterline. In practice, the system redistributed existing air. What reached the lowest cabins was warm, damp, and carried the mineral tang of the boiler rooms with it. The fans could not overcome the ship's own heat. On the lower decks, the air was not fresh. It was recycled breath, coal vapor, and engine warmth stirred together and pushed through painted tin ducts. Without that system, the lower decks would have been uninhabitable. With it, they were merely unpleasant. Every breath a third-class passenger took was managed by a system they never saw and could not control. The class separation aboard the Titanic mirrored the Edwardian world with architectural precision. First class occupied the center and upper decks, the widest and most stable part of the ship. Their cabins had wardrobes, writing desks, electric heaters, and private bathrooms. Some suites had sitting rooms. The a la carte restaurant served 11 courses. Second class occupied a narrower band, smaller cabins, shared bathrooms, a library, a smoking room. Comfortable by any standard of 1912, comparable to first class on most other liners. Third class was pressed to the margins, the bow, the stern, the lowest decks, deep in the hull where the motion of the sea was most pronounced. What separated these worlds was not just amenity, but physics. In rough weather, passengers in forward steerage felt the bow lift and slam against each wave. The motion in a first-class cabin amidships was barely perceptible. Sleep in third class came in fragments. Sleep in first class came with a steward drawing the curtains. And then the temperature of the water. On the night of April 14th, the Atlantic's surface measured 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Seawater freezes at a lower temperature than fresh water, so it was liquid, barely. cold does not feel like cold at first, it feels like fire. The nerve endings cannot distinguish between extremes. A human body immersed in that water loses the ability to grip within 2 minutes. Unconsciousness follows in 15, death in under 45. The iceberg struck at 11:40 p.m. The impact lasted roughly 10 seconds. First-class passengers felt a shudder. Some described it as a large dog shaking itself. In the boiler rooms, the reality was different. Frederick Barrett, a leading fireman in Boiler Room 6, watched the hull plates buckle inward. Water entered at a rate that would eventually fill the room to the ceiling. The watertight door began to close. Barrett jumped through it. The man behind him did not. In steerage, the impact sounded different. Passengers in the forward cabins on G-deck described a grinding metallic scream that lasted several seconds, followed by a shudder that knocked luggage from upper bunks. Some thought they had struck another ship. Some thought a boiler had exploded. The corridor lights flickered once, then held. No alarm sounded. No steward came. Several passengers opened their cabin doors and looked both ways down the corridor, saw nothing, and went back to bed. Third-class passengers were not informed of the collision for nearly 30 minutes. Many received no instruction at all. The stewards who served steerage were few, and some spoke only English in sections filled with Swedish, Arabic, and Croatian speakers. Passengers who went to investigate found the corridors confusing. The layout below E-deck was a labyrinth of passages, stairs that dead-ended, and doors marked crew only. The gates remained locked. This is not legend. Survivors testified to it before both the American and British inquiries. Third-class passengers gathered at the foot of stairwells on E-deck and found barriers with stewards standing behind them. Some gates were eventually opened. Others were forced by passengers. Others remained closed until the water arrived. A man stands at the bottom of a stairwell on E-deck with a child on each hip. He does not speak English. The gate above him is a simple steel lattice barrier with a latch on the far side. A steward on the other side of the gate is looking past him, not at him. The ship is listing noticeably now. Water is pooling on the floor behind him, running along the base of the corridor wall. He does not know that less than half the lifeboats have launched. He does not know that several left the ship less than half full. Lifeboat 7 departed with 28 people in a vessel rated for 65. Lifeboat 1 carried 12. First-class women were escorted to the boat deck and helped aboard. Their survival rate was 97%. Of the 179 third-class women aboard, 89 survived, roughly half. Of the 76 children in steerage, 23 died. In first class, every child survived. The final numbers carry the weight of everything that came before them. 62% of first-class passengers survived, 41% of second class, 25% of third class. The crew survival rate was 24%. The firemen, the trimmers, the men who had kept the ship alive, most of them died in the same water they had spent the voyage trying not to think about. After the sinking, the recovery ship Mackay Bennett pulled 306 bodies from the Atlantic. First-class passengers were placed in coffins. Second-class passengers were wrapped in canvas. Unidentified or third-class passengers were buried at sea, sewn into weighted sacks, and slipped back into the water. Even the protocol for recovering the dead observed the class structure of the living. The bugle that called steerage to meals went silent at roughly 1:40 a.m. The ventilation fans stopped when the dynamos flooded. The engine vibration that had defined every waking and sleeping moment below the waterline ceased for the first time in 5 days. And for the passengers still trapped in the lower corridors, that silence was the last signal they understood. Whether the locked gates were policy, panic, or negligence depends on what you believe institutions protect when there is not enough room for everyone. The answer you give reveals less about 1912 than about what you expect from the systems around you now. These reconstructions continue, one voyage, one city, one buried truth at a time.